The smell of old wood mixed with mold was oppressive, but Gabriel pretended not to care. He knew that moving to this house wasn't just his parents' choice. It was a necessity. It's temporary, they said. But the house's somber, aged appearance made it feel as though it would swallow them forever. While his parents unpacked boxes downstairs, Gabriel explored his new room. The walls were peeling, and the faded wallpaper hung in strips, revealing patches of dampness. In the darkest corner, a small, low cabinet caught his attention. He approached it, noticing the rusty lock. He pulled at the door with force, but it was locked. After some persistence, and using a makeshift key, a bent hairpin, he managed to open it. The cabinet groaned, as if being violated after decades of silence. Inside, there was only dust, cobwebs, and something unexpected, a diary. It was an old book with a brown leather cover that reeked of decay. Gabriel picked it up, intrigued. Despite its worn appearance, the diary seemed intact, with no signs of deterioration on its pages. He opened it, but found all the pages blank. That night, after finishing unpacking, Gabriel sat at his desk with the diary. Something about it felt inviting, as though it was begging to be used. With a slight smile, he grabbed a pen and wrote the first sentence. "Today was my first day in this house." He closed the diary and set it aside, but his curiosity got the better of him. He opened it again and widened his eyes at what he saw. The sentence he had written was still there, but below it, a new line had appeared. "You lied. You don't like the house, and are pretending everything is fine." Gabriel's stomach churned. He snapped the diary shut and tossed it aside, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank, but who would write something so personal? In the darkness of his room, the diary seemed to call to him again. In the days that followed, Gabriel tried to ignore the diary. He had stuffed it deep into his backpack, alongside old notebooks, convinced it was nothing more than a trick or a bizarre coincidence. But in moments of silence, he couldn't help thinking about the words that had appeared. It was as if the diary had exposed something he was hiding even from himself. That morning, while searching for a book for school, his hand brushed against the diary's rough leather cover. He hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won out. Sitting on his bed, he opened the diary and began flipping through its pages. They were still blank, except for the previous entry. Inspired, he decided to test it. He wrote, "I'm nervous about the math test today." He closed the diary and reopened it. The sentence he'd written remained, but just below, another line appeared, as if an invisible hand were writing at that very moment. "It's not the test that scares you. It's the fear of disappointing your father again." A chill ran down Gabriel's spine. It was true. He hadn't told anyone about the pressure he felt regarding his father's expectations, especially after repeating a grade in school. The precision of the words was unsettling. Determined to test it again, this time with something less emotional, he picked up the pen and wrote, "What are you?" This time, the response took longer to appear. Gabriel watched the diary, as if expecting something alive to react. Then slowly, the words emerged. "I am what you hide." Fear gave way to fascination. Gabriel started carrying the diary with him, testing it during breaks and at night, writing down questions and thoughts. The answers were always precise, as if the diary knew more about him than he did himself. But things began to change. One afternoon, while writing something trivial, the diary responded unexpectedly. "You shouldn't have opened the cabinet." The sentence echoed in his mind. The diary seemed to be speaking about something more than simple secrets. Gabriel tried to laugh it off, convincing himself it was just his imagination. However, when he attempted to put the diary aside, something strange happened. The next morning, he found it lying in the center of his desk, even though he was certain he had left it in his backpack before going to bed. In the days that followed, Gabriel began to feel the weight of the diary as a constant shadow. He couldn't explain how the object seemed to move around the house, but something inside him compelled him to keep opening it, despite his growing unease. One night, while everyone was asleep, he turned on the lamp in his room and opened the diary again. His hands trembled slightly, but he still managed to write. "Why did you say I shouldn't have opened the cabinet?" The words began to appear slowly, like ink seeping from an invisible pen. "You awakened something that was sleeping." Gabriel swallowed hard. He tried to make sense of what the diary was saying, but each answer only brought more questions. Struggling to remain calm, he wrote again. What exactly was awakened? This time, the response was short and direct. The beginning of the end. The air in the room felt heavier. Gabriel slammed the diary shut and tried to sleep, but when he turned off the light, he thought he heard something dragging across the floor. He didn't dare move. The next day, things got worse. While at school, he opened his backpack to grab a notebook and found the diary inside. He was certain he had left it at home. Confused, he opened it and saw new words written, even though he hadn't touched the diary since the night before. "You cannot escape." An intense chill ran through him as he quickly shut the book, but his mind raced. After returning home, he decided to search online for anything that might explain the diary's origins. He found vague mentions of a similar object, with stories of former owners who had disappeared or gone insane, but nothing concrete. As he read more, he felt as though he was being watched. He looked up from his computer and saw the diary open on his desk, even though he was sure he had left it closed just minutes earlier. The words on the open page were clear and horrifying. "Your death will be like theirs." Gabriel tried to ignore it. He locked the diary in a drawer and resolved to avoid it entirely. But the next morning, he found it lying on his pillow, open to a new page that read, "The clock is ticking." He realized he was being hunted, and the most terrifying part was that the predator seemed to be something he had invited into his life. Gabriel woke up with his heart racing. Once again, the diary was at the center of his desk, open, with freshly written words he couldn't ignore. "You know what you must do." The phrase seemed to pulse in his mind, but he had no idea what it meant. Desperate, he decided to try something he had never attempted before: destroy the diary. Grabbing a pair of scissors, he began cutting through the pages with force. To his shock, each torn sheet seemed to regenerate, as if the book were alive. With a frustrated yell, he threw the diary to the floor. It hit the wall and slid down, but remained completely intact. Panicking, he ran to the kitchen and lit the stove. He tossed the diary directly into the flame. For a moment, he thought it was working, but the fire simply extinguished itself. The leather was unscathed, and the pages were as pristine as ever. "Why won't you disappear?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Suddenly, words began to appear on the open page. "Because you haven't made your choice." Gabriel's body trembled. The diary seemed to be toying with him, steering him toward an inevitable fate. Grabbing the pen, he decided to confront the entity tormenting him. In large, shaky letters, he wrote, "What do you want from me?" The answer appeared instantly. "Truth or sacrifice? Choose." Confused, Gabriel read and reread the words. Then, the next page filled rapidly with a horrifying vision: himself, bloodied and sprawled on a cold, dark floor. His death felt imminent, and the diary seemed to demand something in return for him to escape that fate. He tried to reach out for help. Gabriel wrote notes and sent text messages to friends and even his mother, but nothing reached its recipient. The notes vanished, and the messages failed to send. It was as if the diary had severed his connection to the outside world. That night, Gabriel had a vivid nightmare. He saw the diary on an altar, surrounded by shadows whispering his name. When he tried to run, he was pulled back into the darkness, where a guttural voice said, "The choice cannot wait." When he woke, the diary was back in his hands. The open page displayed two options written in dark ink. Reveal the darkest secret of someone you love. Accept your fate. Gabriel knew the choice was impossible. If he revealed the secret, he would ruin someone else's life. If he accepted his fate, it could seal his own death. Trembling, he slammed the diary shut and shoved it into a drawer. He wouldn't choose, or so he thought. The diary went silent. For 2 days, Gabriel saw no more messages appear, and the object seemed to have lost its power. He locked it in the drawer again and tried to move on with his life, even though the fear still lingered, like a shadow in the back of his mind. On the morning of the 3rd day, Gabriel noticed something unusual when he woke up. The diary was no longer in the drawer. He searched everywhere, but there was no sign of it. For the first time in weeks, he felt a genuine sense of relief. Maybe, he thought, the diary had disappeared for good, tired of his indecision. The house felt different that day, lighter, quieter. Gabriel managed to go about his day without the constant sensation of being watched. At school, he laughed with his friends and focused in class, as though he had finally been freed. But that night, when he returned home, something felt off. His younger sister, Clara, was sitting on the couch, her gaze fixed on a notebook in her hands. Gabriel froze. He immediately recognized the worn brown leather and the frayed edges. The diary. "Clara, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice faltering. She looked up confused. "It's just a notebook I found in your room. It's weird but fun. I wrote some things and it wrote back." Gabriel rushed over, snatching the diary from her hands. He flipped through the most recent pages, hoping to find something harmless. Instead, he saw messages written in dark ink. Now it's her turn. His knees nearly buckled. He looked at Clara, who stared back with innocent curiosity, completely unaware of what was happening. Gabriel's terror turned to despair. The diary had moved on to someone else, and he seemed powerless to stop it. That night, Gabriel stayed awake, racking his brain for a solution. But what could he do? If neither fire nor isolation could destroy the diary, how could he protect Clara? Before dawn, he heard light footsteps in the hallway and the sound of pages turning. Peeking through the door, he saw Clara sitting on her bedroom floor, writing in the diary with an innocent smile. Gabriel's heart sank. He realized he was no longer the protagonist of this story. The curse had found a new chapter, and all he could do was watch.